There is one predator in the ocean that answers to nothing. It flips great whites like coins. It coordinates the dismantling of blue whales. It has been recorded sinking European sailboats and stealing tuna from beneath the hooks of commercial fishermen. Nothing beneath the waves is supposed to make it hesitate. And yet, somewhere in the deep blue, there is a species this apex assassin now quietly avoids. A creature so formidable that entire pods of killer whales, once observed hunting it, have grown to circle away when they detect its presence. Not because it is bigger than the animals they routinely dismantle, not because it is faster, but because generations of orcas have learned, through blood and consequence, that this particular hunt is simply not worth surviving. Its name is the sperm whale. And the story of why orcas stopped attacking it is one of the most fascinating power shifts in the modern ocean. For most of maritime history, the sperm whale was not seen as untouchable. Old whaling logs, some dating back to the early 1800s, describe orca pods, then called killers, chasing sperm whale groups across open water, harassing them for hours, sometimes days. Whalers noted that when a pod of orcas closed in, sperm whales would often flee at full speed, their enormous tail flukes churning the sea into foam. It seemed, at least on the surface, that the biggest toothed predator on the planet was afraid of a smaller one. For a long time, that assumption held. Marine biologists in the mid-20th century believed sperm whales were essentially oversized prey, slow, blubber-rich, and vulnerable, particularly the young. In 1997, off the coast of California, researchers recorded something that seemed to confirm this. A coordinated pod of orcas attacked a group of sperm whales, isolated one animal, and killed it in front of the observation team. The footage circulated widely. It became the textbook example of orca supremacy. But scientists watching that footage more carefully noticed something strange. Even during that attack, the sperm whales did not scatter and abandon their own. They regrouped, they fought back. And in the years since, that same behavior, recorded again and again in the Indian Ocean, off Sri Lanka, near the Azores, has begun to tell a very different story. Because the sperm whale is not, and never was, a passive victim. It is one of the most heavily armed animals in the sea, and once orcas began encountering the full arsenal at close range, the calculations started to change. To understand why orcas hesitate, you have to understand what a sperm whale actually is. Physeter macrocephalus, the great-headed blower. A male can grow to just over 20 meters, 65 feet, and tip the scale at nearly 57 metric tons. That is close to 6 times the mass of a full-grown male orca, but raw size is only the beginning. Nearly 1/3 of that enormous body is head, and that head is not a skull and jaw the way you might imagine. It is a dense, oil-filled acoustic chamber, the spermaceti organ, a biological instrument evolution has been refining for over 20 million years. It is used to focus sound. It is used to crush pressure at depths that would fold a submarine, and when necessary, it becomes a battering ram capable of splintering solid oak. In 1820, an 87-foot Nantucket whaling ship called the Essex was sunk in the Pacific by a single male sperm whale that struck it head-on, twice. The account of that attack, written by the ship's first mate, later became the raw material for Moby Dick. That story was not fiction. The Essex went down. Reinforced hulls have been holed. Modern researchers estimate that a large male, closing at speed, delivers a blunt impact comparable to a locomotive. Then there is the jaw. Sperm whales carry a lower mandible, lined with more than 40 teeth, each nearly the length of a human hand and thick as a wrist. The upper jaw carries mostly sockets, not teeth, but the lower is a bone-crushing vice. Bite force estimates are staggering, easily capable of severing a shark or crushing the rib cage of a large mammal. And below the head, that massive tail. A sperm whale's fluke is broad, muscular, and driven by the strongest caudal musculature in the animal kingdom. A single sweep can travel with enough force to cave in the flank of an orca, and there is now recorded evidence of exactly that happening. An orca approaching a sperm whale is not approaching a slow, blubbery meal. It is approaching a mobile fortress with 3 separate weapon systems, any one of which can end the fight in a heartbeat. But the sperm whale's most extraordinary weapon is not physical, it is acoustic. Sperm whales produce the loudest sound ever recorded from a living organism. Their clicks, generated inside the spermaceti organ and projected outward through a specialized structure called the monkey lips, can reach 230 decibels underwater. To put that in perspective, a jet engine at takeoff hits about 150 decibels in air. The sperm whale's click, in water, carries a shockwave energy so extreme that researchers who have been accidentally targeted at close range have described a physical sensation, like being struck by an invisible fist across the chest. For decades, biologists assumed these clicks were purely for echolocation. The sperm whale hunts giant squid a mile below the surface in total darkness. It needs a sonar system precise enough to pinpoint soft-bodied prey against the crushing black. But newer research suggests the click has a second function. At close range, focused directly, it may temporarily disorient, even stun, smaller cetaceans. Orcas rely on their own echolocation to coordinate attacks. Their pods communicate through complex vocal patterns that must be delivered and received cleanly to synchronize a hunt. When a sperm whale group starts clicking in defense, that acoustic environment becomes chaos. It is the underwater equivalent of trying to whisper battle orders inside a stadium during a thunderstorm. An orca pod that pushes an assault too close simply loses its coordination. And a coordinated pod is the only thing that makes an orca attack work. Without it, they are just individual dolphins closing on an animal 6 times their size. If the clicks are the sperm whale's alarm system, the Margarite formation is its fortress. The moment a sperm whale group senses a threat, a pod of orcas approaching, an unfamiliar sound signature, the vibration of tightening water pressure from below, the response is immediate and choreographed. The adults form a tight circle, heads pointing inward, tails pointing outward. The calves and juveniles are sealed inside that ring, protected by a rotating perimeter of 30-ton bodies whose lethal ends face any direction an attacker might come from. Whalers named it the Marguerite Formation, after the daisy, because from above, the pattern of radiating bodies looked like flower petals. What they did not initially understand was that this was not panic. It was strategy. Every direction of approach met a tail sweep zone. Every attempt to isolate a calf ran into a wall of adult flanks. The formation could hold for hours. It could rotate. Individual whales could surface to breathe without breaking the ring. Orca hunting depends on separation. Their entire tactical playbook, from wave-washing seals off ice to isolating a blue whale calf from its mother, is built around cutting one animal away from the group. The Margarite defeats that playbook entirely. There is no isolated target. There is no exposed flank. There is only a rotating wheel of lethal biomass, and the animals inside the wheel are the ones you came to eat. Attempting to break it means swimming into the tail arc of an animal that outweighs you by tens of thousands of pounds. And even if you get past a fluke, you have only reached the head, which, at that range, is the exact end of the sperm whale designed for close-quarters combat. There is no successful attack pattern that survives contact with an intact Margarite. The orcas that once thought otherwise, generations ago, taught the rest of their species what happens when the ring holds. But the sperm whale's defense goes far beyond formation. It is powered by something scientists have only recently begun to fully appreciate, a mind that rivals, and in some measures exceeds, the orcas. The sperm whale has the largest brain of any animal ever known to exist. Not the largest relative to body size, larger in absolute mass. Roughly 9 kilograms of tissue, with a neocortical structure that mirrors the same evolutionary emphasis on social intelligence, memory, and long-range communication seen in humans, elephants, and orcas themselves. Within that brain lives an intricate cultural life. Sperm whales speak in patterned sequences of clicks called codas. Different clans, spread across different ocean basins, use different coda dialects, as distinct from one another as separate human languages. A sperm whale from the Eastern Caribbean cannot socially integrate with a sperm whale from the South Pacific, even though they are the same species, share the same ocean, and eat the same prey. Their vocal culture keeps them apart, the way accents and customs divide human tribes. Within a clan, cooperation is total. Females stay with the group they were born into for their entire lives, often reaching 70 or more. Calves are cared for collectively. Babysitting duties rotate between adults, allowing mothers to dive for hours to hunt, while their young remain protected at the surface. This is not instinct. It is taught behavior, passed from one generation to the next, refined over millennia. And these are the same animals now defending against orca attacks. It is not one whale reacting on impulse. It is a coordinated, culturally trained, multi-generational unit, responding to a threat its ancestors have taught it to recognize. Nowhere is the emotional depth of that unit more visible than in what happens when the ring is broken. Researchers off Sri Lanka in 2013 recorded a group of sperm whales that had adopted a bottlenose dolphin with a spinal deformity. The dolphin had been rejected by its own pod, and the sperm whales, a species evolutionarily distant, dietarily distinct, and socially unrelated, folded it into their group. They swam with it. They fed near it. When photographs of the encounter reached the scientific community, it forced a reconsideration of what these animals are capable of feeling. There are documented cases of sperm whale mothers refusing to leave the bodies of dead calves for days, of adults returning again and again to injured pod members, attempting to lift them to the surface to breathe, of entire groups changing migration routes to accommodate a single elderly female too weak to keep pace. When orcas do occasionally break through a defensive formation and kill a young sperm whale, which still happens, particularly with inexperienced groups, the survivors do not simply disperse and move on. They remain in the area. They vocalize. Mothers have been observed circling for hours where their calves were lost, refusing food and refusing to dive. This is not the reaction of dumb tonnage. This is a species that grieves, and a species that grieves is a species that remembers. Which brings us to the reason orcas began backing off in the first place. Somewhere in the last few centuries, sperm whales appear to have learned that fleeing does not work. For most of recorded history, including the peak of the whaling era, the standard sperm whale response to a threat was to run. Whalers exploited this ruthlessly. A fleeing whale was a predictable whale. It surfaced to breathe. It exhausted itself. It could be chased down by a rowing boat. Orcas exploited the same behavior. A fleeing pod fractured. Fractured pods produced isolated targets. Isolated targets became meals. But sperm whales that ran were the sperm whales that died. Over generations, the survivors, the ones whose genes and behaviors were carried forward, were those who did the opposite, who stopped, who formed the ring, who fought. Behavioral biologists studying this shift call it a species-wide cultural pivot, and orcas, watching that pivot happen in real time, appear to have adjusted their own hunting culture in response. Because the calculation for a pod of orcas is not simple. To take down a large adult sperm whale requires most of the pod, working in perfect synchronization, for hours. It requires exhausting the target while avoiding tail sweeps and head strikes. It requires accepting injuries, sometimes lethal ones, and the loss of coordination that follows every failed pass. And even with a full commitment, success against an adult male or against a well-formed marguerite of females is rare. For an animal that evolution has optimized to make hunting look effortless, an hours-long fight with uncertain outcome and real risk of death is not efficient predation. It is a mistake, and orcas do not repeat mistakes. They teach around them. The most striking evidence of this shift comes not from labs, but from encounters marine biologists have been recording over the last 2 decades. Off the coast of Dominica, researchers who have followed the same sperm whale families for years describe orcapods that pass through the area regularly and pass by. The sperm whales register the orcas acoustically. The orcas register the sperm whales acoustically. Neither group closes the distance. It is not fear on either side. It is something closer to a mutual, tacit agreement to keep swimming. In the Southern Ocean, expedition footage from 2019 captured a pod of Type A orcas, the largest and most aggressive of the Antarctic ecotypes, the ones that specialize in hunting large whales, encountering a group of sperm whales at close range. The orcas approached, the sperm whales formed, and after a period of vocalization, the orcas turned and moved off. There are outliers. Young orcapods without experienced matriarchs still attempt attacks, usually on lone individuals or vulnerable calves. Some of those attempts succeed. Most do not. The failure rate is high enough that experienced pods, led by older females carrying decades of accumulated knowledge, do not initiate them. The old males of the orca world, and the wise grandmothers who lead pods for 4 decades after menopause, remember what younger animals do not: that the great-headed whale is not prey, that the fight is not worth the meal, that every hunter, eventually, meets an animal it cannot afford to catch. The story of the orca and the sperm whale is, in some ways, the story of the ocean's oldest and quietest peace. Not a peace born of respect, though respect may be part of it now. Not a peace born of alliance, because these two species will never be allies. It is a peace born of cost, of accumulated memory, of generations of orcas watching what happens when a marguerite holds and a tail fluke lands, of sperm whales learning that survival is not measured in the ability to flee, but in the willingness to turn, gather, and face. Both species carry names given by the humans who hunted them. Both have lost countless numbers to industries that never understood what was being killed. Both now navigate an ocean growing louder with ship traffic, more acidic with carbon, and more empty of the prey their cultures were built around. Their food webs are unraveling. Their acoustic worlds are dissolving into the drone of engines and sonar. The same intelligence that lets them recognize each other as adversaries not worth engaging is the intelligence that will feel every one of those losses. And still, when they meet, the largest toothed hunter and the largest coordinated predator, they pass. One holds. The other turns. And the ocean, for a few miles at least, remains what it has been for millions of years. A place where power is real and restraint is real. The next time you picture the killer whale as the ocean's uncontested ruler, remember that even the ruler yields. And remember that somewhere far below the surface, in a dark pressure that would kill you in seconds, an animal larger than a bus is teaching its calf which sounds to fear, which formation to hold, and which fights, in the end, are the ones you win by refusing to start.